Hi, everyone. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And our guest today is Tamsen Webster. And she's written a book called Find Your Red Thread. And it's a really important book and important ideas around messaging and messaging that will make your offer to your marketplace, to your target market, more impactful, more successful for you. So let's listen in as Tamsen joins our show. Well, welcome, Tamsen Webster, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Appreciate you being here.
Oh, you're so kind to have me. So thanks so much.
So Tamsen, for our audience, just to give context, who do you serve primarily and what do you do for them?
So I primarily serve individual experts and founders, and particularly founder experts. And I work with them on how to articulate their ideas, or which oftentimes, position their businesses, et cetera, go-to-market messaging, so that the people who most need their products and services know that they do and act on them.
Okay, so that's great. That's very crisp. And I know you've written a book recently called the Find Your Red Thread, which I thought is a very intriguing title for the book. So could you just tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. So the book is for those kinds of experts, and particularly for those experts that struggle with getting other people to see the power in their ideas that they do. In other words, you've got a business owner or entrepreneur who's got this massive idea, or they think it's a big idea, or they have an idea, however big it might be. And oftentimes what I see in my work is that those people really, really struggle to translate it out of, let's say, engineering language or technical language or medical language into concepts and words that people who really need those ideas or could benefit from them, inclusive of investors, so that they can understand. So I wrote it for them, and I wrote it as a way to capture the process that I use with my own clients, both one-on-one and do in workshops and things like that, to help them find and articulate those ideas in what I think is the most powerful way possible.
Now, Tamsen, there are a lot of people listening to this that are running, successful businesses, $5, $10, $15 million private enterprises, nice, healthy businesses, maybe running it for years. And they might be listening to this and say, well, I'm not coming up with a new Apple. I'm not inventing an Amazon. I do what I do. I make steel parts for, aerospace or something like that. It's a nice business. Very proud of it. I don't think I have a big idea. What would you say to that person?
Well, I'd say that it's not so much what you think of the idea as your potential audience thinks about it. Because to me, an idea is an answer. It's an answer to a question that doesn't yet have an answer or that needs a better one, which means that your idea, whether you think it's big or not, could be massive to somebody who doesn't yet have that answer that they're looking for to a question. So as long as your idea answers a question that people have, it's certainly big enough to find the red thread for.
Wow. So somebody doing something that may seem at the surface to be rather, mundane or commodity-like in nature, there's opportunities there to say, well, we actually solved some problems. We figured out some things that really help our clients. Maybe we should find ways to tell people about that's interesting. So what are the first steps other than we'll create a brochure telling the world everything we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, a lot of my clients, both in the past and currently, do have fairly commoditized products, and this approach really was born out of that, because when you generate things that from the outside might look like, well, everybody else has the same kind of thing, but you don't think that. I mean, there's a reason why your company does it its own way, why you have your own version of those things. And oftentimes being able to articulate to other people, and particularly your potential clients and customers, what that difference is, can make the difference between someone buying your version of a commodity product and somebody else's. So that actually brings me to your other question, which is, well, where do you start? And I think the best place for any organization or individual to start is first by understanding contextually, like, who's the audience they want to talk to for this particular version of their message. And then specifically back to that idea of an idea being an answer. What is the question? And the question's really important. What's the question that ideal audience is asking right now for which your product, service, business might be an answer?
So that's interesting because I have a good friend and mentor of mine, David Newman, and he would say,
Yep.
imagine, maybe you know David.
I
So
do. Yep.
he would say, imagine your customer having a conversation over beers with their buddies, dealing with a problem, and saying, I wish somebody would figure out how to fill in the blank, whatever that
That's
is.
right.
That's the
Yeah.
question, right? So
You got it.
trying to
How can I
imagine that.
do X? How can I do Y? Why don't I have this yet? Why aren't we succeeding yet? What's the best way to? How can I get started? How, absolutely. That kind of conversation is exactly where it starts.
So now just thinking about that a little bit. So we're busy in the day to day, we're doing our business. And I have to start thinking these, like, candidly, different type of thoughts about what my customers and prospects might be thinking and talking about over a beer.
Right.
That seems like that's a tough exercise for some people. Is there any
It
way
can
to
be.
simplify that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different ways. One is, ask them, right? That's one of the first places to go. Say, who are either your best clients, and ask them, like, what were the problems that brought them to you in the first place? Because if you want more people like that, then kind of, ask them, like, well, what problem were you trying to solve when you came in here? You could do more general research, either yourself, hire a market research company, or, or draw insights from other research that you find out there. Some of the simplest ways are to ask your frontline people, the people who are customer and client facing, what are the questions that they're asking? What are talk to your IT folks. What are the search strings that bring people to your website? What are they typing in? Because that will really tell you what is it that they're looking for that gets them closer to you.
Wow. So it sounds, I realize the devil's in the details, and the doing is what matters, right? But what's really powerful about that, though, is the simplicity of it. I mean, it's just like, talk to some folks, like, actually pick up no, it's interesting. I've dealt with business owners that run successful businesses for a good period of time, but then I ask them a question, and I always privately, because I never want to embarrass them in front of their colleagues or their staff. But I say, when's the last time you've really talked to a customer? And all too often it's like, it's been a while. Like, they used to, when they built the business from scratch, they used to talk to all the customers.
Of course they did.
But,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. That's how you started. But then, it's been like a decade or whatever since they've really engaged with customers. Or if they engage with customers, it's at the highest levels, like the contract level, and not at the user level, where their own product's being used and how people really feel about the product, the way it's shipped, the packaging, all of that stuff. So it just seems like you can really start digging in around what your customers are thinking as a big thought. Now,
and sorry, just one other point on that. I mean, the other thing is that it can also be aspirational too, right? So even if you don't know, and this seems to be a thing that people skip over a bit when they're coming up with the messaging, is like, yeah, absolutely, you want to know what people are asking right now, but you also get to decide whom you serve. In other words, you get to decide, we want people who are actively asking this question right now. And you can test ahead of time and see how many people are asking that question, so you get a sense of what your total addressable market might be. Or you can do it by socializing a message once you put it out there. But you get to decide as a business owner, these are the people, we want people who are asking this question in this way. Like, that's the question that we answer. So you can determine that too.
Well, there's a lot of power in that too, right? Because one of the exercises I've done with clients is saying, and I ask, especially if it's a team in a room, and I say, just write down, don't talk about it, just write down, who are the 3 customers you would clone if you could,
right?
Like, and just stop it. And then I say, okay, why? And it's all a variety of things that we like, the kind of projects they come up with, the kind of things they ask us for, they deal with us. It could be as mundane as they pay their bills on time, and it's these days,
like,
it's not
thank goodness for that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
They give us a good reputation when we win, whatever those reasons are. But the idea that you actually have agency upfront and picking who you want to do business with. It's not perfect, because sometimes we got to take deals we got to take.
But it also, what I find over and over again is that it helps. So I spent much of the first part of my career in marketing, and I've spent a lot of the last few years helping people on the sales side of things. So it's been very interesting, because of course there's this perpetual tension between marketing and sales. And I think I start to understand a little bit more about why that happens, because marketing tends to have this big aspirational view about what's this big message we want to get out there. And salespeople are like, yeah, I can't say that. That's not language that a human would use. And so what can be really powerful, though, is to be able to say, and the other thing that I hear oftentimes is that, it's really based on what marketing is putting out there. It's really, really difficult for us to qualify leads, right? Because usually it's such a big open statement that it's really hard for us to figure out and to get the better qualified leads right in from the get-go. So, but just think about how powerful it is when you say, we answer this question, that if somebody doesn't have that question or is not actively asking that question, well, they're not your people right now, right? So that means that there's work for marketing to do to help them get to the point where they see the need to ask that question. But it makes it so that it's a lot easier from a process of evaluating a lead as you're talking to them in conversation, like in a potential sales conversation, to say, well, is this, when I speak with other folks like you, they often want to know the answer to this question. Do you, and a lot of times they're going to be like, yeah, absolutely. Right. Because if we don't, when we don't answer that question, we have X, Y, and Z. And each piece of the red thread that I talk about really is an opportunity to have that kind of lead qualifying conversation with someone, which is part of the reason why I'm so passionate about it, as a way to bridge that gap between sales and marketing.
Hey, pardon the interruption. It'll just be a beat. We want to tell you about something that's really exciting, and it might be very exciting to you if you're the owner, CEO, leader of a B2B company, roughly with $2 to $20 million in revenue, and you feel a little bit stuck. You know what I mean? Sales are a little flat, maybe even declining, challenged. Margins are being squeezed. Sales cycles seem to be lengthening, and lead flow is uncertain. We've designed a program based on over a dozen years of us doing exactly this for many B2B companies. It's called the Competitive Edge Program. And you can learn more about it at valueprop.com/edge. Tells you all about the program. It's a 90-day program, really focused on helping you sharpen your value proposition, aligning your value delivery, making sure your marketing program is doing what it has to do if you're in B2B, which is generate opportunities, and make sure your sales process is tight so that you can convert those opportunities into sales. So with that note, let's get back to an exciting episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Well, it's interesting, because that's one of the reasons I started my firm almost 15 years ago, was I saw the gap between sales and marketing. I said, why aren't these people like in the same room? Because they're solving the same equation or the same problem, but in a different part of the time continuum, right? Marketing is laying out the framework, looking out a year or 2 years, building out funnel and so on. And sales has this incredible pressure to close business now. And that's always a challenge, right? So those two things live on, they're almost like one of those sci-fi movies where they're living in the same world, but in different dimensions, they're slightly out of sync with each other.
That's a great analogy.
So, it's interesting, right? So, but what's really powerful about what you do, I think, and you talk about yourself as a translator, right?
Yes.
And you've hit on this thought about, hey, taking things from like one type of language into other type of language, the way people really speak, and then listening to people. So that really resonates with me in a significant way, Tamsen. So if I'm looking at that and I say, but I sell a technical product, it's pretty technical. It's a piece of software. It's a technology. It's a machine that's $200,000 machine. How else I'm going to talk about it? And the people who know the technology and they know how to talk about it technically. What would you say to them as far as where's that right balance mix?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. To me, the analogy of a translator, and I often will introduce myself as an English to English translator. But that translation of that analogy of translation, I think, is really powerful for this reason. I mean, if you are monolingual, if you can only speak one language, you're very limited in what you can just think about in the world. You're very limited in who you can speak to, who else will understand you, and where you can go. But the more languages you speak, the more ability you have to see things from different perspectives, to travel to different places, to interact with different people. And to me, the language of ideas can benefit from the same expansion of language. And even if we're all still talking about English, if you're only talking about your technical product in technical ways, then only people who understand that technical language can have conversations with you. They're the only people who could potentially see the power. But the more that you're able to expand and be able to talk about the ideas, the concepts, the kind of fundamental backing, motivations behind, how your product works in language and concepts that anyone can understand. Well, now you've just widened the group of people to whom you could potentially speak. And your folks might be thinking, well, but everybody I talk to is technical, but not everybody on their team is. Because so often when you've got a technical product, you're first coming into the technical lead on the other side, right? You're talking to that, engineer, that procurement, maybe even it's procurement where, of course, you suddenly need to be able to speak a different language because the procurement person doesn't understand why your particular version of the product is so much more expensive or whatever than somebody else's. And doesn't care, right? And but your technical lead is going to have to convince somebody else about your product much of the time. And so one of the most powerful things you can do is to arm that person who, of course, understands your technical explanation, but to arm that person with a non-technical explanation of how your product works and why it's superior. You are doing yourself and that person a huge favor. And like I said, widening the number of people who you can talk to and be engaged with your product or service. But B, you're also very much more likely to be raising the probability of success of those conversations because it isn't only in that one language.
Right. And you may have to, especially larger capital sales, are going to go through many different types of stakeholders, right? So there's the CFO language, there's the operations language, which may be your native language, i.e. tech, this is what the machine does, this is what the software does. Right. And then there's the executive suite that's saying, okay, what does this mean to my business and to my strategy and any outcomes I'm looking to affect for my business? I really don't care about the speeds and feeds and things like that. I'm really much more interested in what are you going to do for me?
Right. So you've got to be able to, so to me, a message, the way I define a message is how you talk about your idea, which might be your product, your service, your business. So a message is how you talk about your idea to a particular audience to achieve a particular outcome. And it's kind of like, think about like, if you're in a technical job, right? So I've spent a lot of years in marketing. I can talk to other people about marketing and shorthand and language. If I talk to a fellow marketing colleague, I can talk about that in many different ways. But if my 11-year-old son asks me about marketing, the whole idea of what I do or what I understand doesn't change, but the way I talk about it does. And it's that shift, I think, that's really important for folks, particularly at technical and highly sophisticated organizations with highly sophisticated products, to be able to do that. Because if you can explain it, let's say to a 10 or 11-year-old, not that your clients and customers are all of that, but the ability to do that means that you now have that whole range of explanation open to you. You have that most simple explanation, right? This kind of big overview map version, but also that very, very technical turn-by-turn GPS navigation explanation of your idea.
So would you take would your most simple way of describing something be your meta, and the other versions are things which are like dig in deep down?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think of it sometimes like it's a higher resolution, right? Or I use that analogy of a GPS map, right? When you first put in and ask for directions of Google Maps or Apple Maps or something like that, remember the first thing that you get is an overview, right? It's a big high picture of like, we're going to go from here to here, but it doesn't even necessarily show you what road you're going to take. It just shows you the path. And I think your simplest, highest level message is like that. It basically says, in language anyone can understand, we answer this question this way. Great. Okay, what does that mean? And then you kind of click down into the next layer of resolution, right? You start to say, okay, well, here's the route we're going to take. And then the next layer of resolution, next layer of resolution. And it works very well with something that we know works well when it comes to marketing and sales. And that's, what Seth Godin calls permission marketing, where you're never going further than the person is asking you to go, but you're getting buy-in at each point. You're like, we have this question, you have this question, we have this answer. Essentially, do you want to know more? Yes. And then you have an explanation. Again, it's a little bit more detailed, but not fully technical yet. What questions do you have? Do you want to know more? Yes. Then you can just keep adding detail when, how, and where people need it. But it really like is so powerful when you can give them that root overview to begin with.
Right. And they at least know the destination you're trying to take them to.
Exactly.
Like the big idea is there. They're not, I've actually, sat through many years of like coaching and so on, sales presentations where somebody goes so into the details so early. And then an hour later, somebody in the executive team says, well, I got a question. What is it you do again? Like they're starting with that question. You say, whoa, and then time's up, gotta go. We're going to see the next team competing for this business now. It's a failed opportunity because you do have to set, I think, the big picture, because I think the big picture also, and Tamsen, just like your take on this, is an opportunity, not just to say the what, but it gives you a chance to talk about maybe who you are as a company, how you approach things, kind of like your big picture view of things. No,
definitely. I mean, I call that high level overview a through line, and it serves in my mind as a minimum viable message, right? It's a 1-sentence summary of the question you answer.
By the way, I gotta just pause you on that. Minimum viable message.
Minimum viable message.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So your minimum viable message needs to tell people what question you answer and what your answer is. And it needs to do it in a way that they don't expect. So that one sentence needs to contain within it something people want. So that's the question they're asking via a means they don't expect. So they need to understand how you're answering that question, but they need to understand there needs to be something in it that both satisfies their curiosity and creates it at the same time. So, before we were recording, you said, well, what's the big idea of your book? And I said, and I gave you one of those minimum viable messages. I said, well, the big idea of the book is that the best way to make an idea irresistible is to build the story someone will tell it themselves about it. So make your idea irresistible. That's what something people want. But the way that people don't expect is to build the story that people will tell themselves about it, right? Mm. So you understand the words, right? You understand kind of what that might mean, but ideally it's enough for you to go, okay, I understand, and I want to know more. And so after that, you would follow up generally, and this is what I call in the book, the storyline, with the minimum viable case, which is, the shortest explanation for why in my case, building a story people will tell themselves is the best way to make your idea irresistible.
That's brilliant. I love it. And I love the turn of phrase that was, we've gotten used now to like minimum viable product, but that is great. Minimum viable message, minimum viable case.
Yep.
And Tamsen Webster, you've added so much value in these tight 20 minutes here. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Very much a person after my own heart in terms of messaging. I mean, hey, I named the company Value Prop, so I'm all in on this. So if somebody listening, Tamsen, said, yeah, gee, this sounds interesting, where should they go? I mean, minimally, it should go to Amazon and Find Your Red Thread.
Yes, of course. That would be lovely.
Right. Okay, lovely. And then as far as contacting you, reaching out to you, learning more about your business, where should they go?
TamsenWebster.com. That's the easiest place for them to go and to give it a try. See what else they could do.
Fantastic. Tamsen Webster, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you were a pleasure to speak to. So thank you for lending me your audience today.
Absolutely. Take care. Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. If you like this episode and if you like the series, make sure you subscribe below. And also, if you liked it, please do review it. When people are looking for something exciting to listen to, especially the kind of content we're bringing, which is practical insights for B2B companies, this is a place and a free resource that they can take advantage of. Let them know about it with your review. So subscribe, review, enjoy. Thanks again.